morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Just like yesterday, jam-packed today, so many topics that have to be hit, so many things that need to be discussed, and we're going to try our best to get it all done here in a timely manner. That means Jake Fromm before we're done. That's always great. Connor Riley joins us as a preview to tonight's College Football Playoff Top 25 being re-released, and what I believe is a little bit of an emerging controversy in the SEC involving the SEC championship. In fact, we're going to begin the show by talking about that. Is it true, as some are suggesting, even some coaches in the league, that perhaps nobody wants to play in the SEC championship? And what does that mean for the college football playoff? We'll talk about that. There is potentially some good injury news as it relates to Georgia, and a pretty strong retort from Kirby Smart after some antics from his opponent on Saturday. So we'll cover all of that ground. A very, very busy show on tap. A little bit of recruiting mixed in on this, too. So let's get ready to get it going. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a conversation starting to take place, and I think you can call this a little bit of an emerging controversy, where a sporting event that I've always loved, and I've said this many times, my single favorite sporting event has always been the SEC championship. Obviously, I've been very proud as a Georgia fan to be there and watch Georgia win numerous times, but I've even enjoyed going to SEC championship games just for various reasons. Even when Georgia's not playing, it's just a really cool event. The passion's always so intense. And frankly, more so than any other conference, the pride of winning an SEC championship has always been so substantial that the game always feels big, frankly, no matter who is playing in it. And, you know, we sort of said going into the 12-team playoff era that the unique nature of the SEC and the special place the SEC championship has had in all of our lives, that event could probably withstand the inevitable change occurring around it. But we also acknowledge that, listen, there are a lot of things that are going to be true about a college football universe in a 12-team playoff era that we won't really know is true until we actually see it play out. Well, guess what? That's starting to happen. And we're starting to see something sort of weird play out that now does call us to maybe kind of reconsider what the SEC championship means in this current world in which we're living. And, you know, Kirby Smart was asked this directly yesterday of, do you want to play in the SEC championship? Given the fact that you want to be a playoff team and given the fact that you want the best chance to make the college football playoff and advance in the playoff once you get there, you want to have success in the college football playoff. Is the SEC championship actually a good thing here right now? Is a spot in that game actually a good thing right now? And I thought it was very interesting that Kirby Smart sort of sidestepped that, chose not to really answer the question and kind of pivot back to this week's opponent. But sometimes silence speaks volumes, and this was maybe an example of that from Kirby Smart yesterday. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart's answer when asked of, hey, do you want to play in the SEC championship? This is what Kirby said.
I don't think that's a hypothetical that, you know, the focus is on UMass. I mean, it really is. So why would I put energy or time into trying to figure out what the best pathway is, including the SEC championship, when I'm worried about UMass? I just don't think it's a quality conversation.
Now, on the one hand, it's not surprising that Kirby Smart says he's worried about the game they're about to play. That's typical Kirby. But it's still somewhat interesting that he doesn't sort of pay credence to the SEC championship right there, because let's keep recent Georgia history in mind. Do you remember that in 2022, when Georgia was going, as we like to say back then, go for 2 in 22, that Kirby didn't really pay a lot of respect to the idea of winning a second straight national championship? He said, and you'll remember this, he told this to Scott Van Pelt at SportsCenter and all these things, he said that team was motivated that year by wanting to win the SEC championship, something that the 2021 team had not done. And so Kirby, as much as any coach out there, has said, listen, man, the chance to win an SEC championship, that means something in our league. That means something to this team. Even in comparison sometimes, he would say, to winning a national championship, there's something really special about winning the SEC championship. In fact, Smart has said that plenty of times. So in that particular situation there, when the reporter asked him, hey, is there any thought in your mind that maybe it's good not to play in the SEC championship? Because keep in mind here for a moment, we have the potential of a lot of teams with very similar records. There could be, at the end of next weekend, a glut of teams at 6-2. And so in league play, these are a lot of playoff-level teams potentially also kind of vying for a spot in that SEC championship. So the thought process here is, well, force somebody else to go play in the SEC championship. You'll take the 5 seed, the 6 seed, or whatever seed they give you, and watch somebody else play the extra game. Kirby Smart, if he really wanted the SEC championship, really wanted to be in the game, could have said, well, our focus is on UMass, but of course we want to win the SEC championship. It's the SEC, and in this league, it always matters, it always have, it always will. He could have said that, but that's not what he chose to say, because you might conclude that maybe Smart, like some coaches, is starting to realize that if you really want to advance in the playoff, if you want to have the best chance to succeed in the playoff, perhaps avoiding the SEC championship is the best thing to do. The risk of losing the game, the punishment of having to play the extra game even if you win it, and the possibility that the reward of getting one of those top 4 byes, advancing to the quarterfinal without having to play in the first round, that it's just not enough of a reward to make the extra game worth it. Smart avoids comment on that all around, but somebody else didn't. Somebody else in the SEC was willing to take that topic head on. I'm going to show you this on the screen. On 3 quotes Lane Kiffin here, and it's kind of funny to me the role that Kiffin plays in all this, and I don't know, I guess in this year I've had a strange new respect for Lane Kiffin. I've had sort of a reconsideration of him. Obviously, he's doing a good job on the field, as 2 Saturdays ago proves out. But Kiffin is also seemingly either because he's willing to do it or because the other coaches just sort of push him to do it. Sometimes Kiffin is willing to say things other coaches don't, whether it be about who gets night games and who doesn't, or the role the SEC championship plays in a current 12-team playoff world. I like the fact that Lane Kiffin's willing to say some of these kinds of things. And so when Kirby Smart says, listen, I'm focused on UMass right now, Lane Kiffin was a lot more willing to be forthcoming. And this is what on 3 quotes Lane Kiffin is saying about this issue of if you think you're already in the playoff, that maybe some coaches don't want to play in the SEC championship game. Kiffin quoted as saying, I've talked to other coaches, so I'll just give the feeling from some of the other coaches that they don't want to be in it. You know, the reward to get a bye in the college football playoff versus the risk to get knocked out completely. I mean, that's a big risk, he says. Kiffin then goes on to say, as quoted by On 3, I think it's ended up being a very unique situation of all postseason sports. The way that system is set up there, how could you go to the SEC championship, get knocked out of the college football playoff race? And if you don't go to the SEC championship game, then you're in. That's Lane Kiffin saying that other coaches also believe this too, that there just may not be much value in playing in the SEC championship game, and many coaches may now hope that they avoid it. Now, let me give you one thought on this here for a moment. I mentioned a moment ago that as you kind of watch the season play out in the first year of the 12-team playoff world, my opinions on certain things have kind of evolved a little bit. An example of that is before the season began, the one thing I would have said, this sort of bumps into what Lane Kiffin was just discussing. The one thing I would have said is, well, here's what the committee can't do. The committee can't punish the loser of the SEC championship game. You can't exclude that team from the playoff for the punishment of losing a game that other teams in the SEC didn't play in. And I was pretty confident that's the way that I would feel as the season plays out. But I got to tell you, as we're watching this unfold, and I'll tell you why, because when you look at how convoluted the tiebreaker formula is, and by the way, Connor Riley, who will join us later, has a really good story up this morning at DawgNation.com where he talks about the path that Georgia still has to make the SEC championship and conversely the path that others have to get there too. It's so convoluted. It doesn't bring in the sort of typical tiebreaker criteria of the past, including like where you're ranked in the CFP top 25. Georgia beating Texas doesn't seem to count for Georgia at all in these potential tiebreakers because so few other teams played Texas because Texas has played such a soft schedule. So there's a certain randomness to who wins that tiebreaker. You also have a situation where Texas could play its way into the SEC championship on the virtue of a schedule that's just so much weaker than any of the other teams that it's being compared to. So in a situation like that, where you've got one team who made it because of some random tiebreaker, another team who made it because of an sort of a statistically unlikely soft schedule, at that point, are we really so sure that the loser of that game couldn't be excluded from the playoff? I'm not quite so sure that maybe the loser of that game, especially if it's Texas, shouldn't be kicked out. And Texas will be whining from here to kingdom come. But the honest truth is, if you haven't really beaten anybody and you miss out on the chance to beat an extra team when it comes to that SEC championship, maybe you should be excluded. So, Kiffin says coaches don't want to go because of the potential punishment of losing the SEC championship. And I'd say back to Lane on that, even though I'm glad he spoke up on this, hey, maybe some of these teams, such as the Texas, maybe they should be punished. And, maybe a team like that ought to view the SEC championship as a chance to get the sort of validating win. Otherwise, you don't have. Now, you'd potentially beat Texas A&M. But Texas literally has not played anybody in comparison to what we kind of think about when it comes to Georgia and some of those kinds of teams. So in a situation like that, I wouldn't have a problem with the loser of the SEC championship. It was excluded from the college football playoff if it had, that kind of resume. Now, if it's Georgia, obviously I'd feel much differently because Georgia's already played such a grueling schedule. And if anybody really would be within their rights to want to avoid the SEC championship, of course it's Georgia. I'm not surprised that Kirby Smart doesn't want to say that out loud, but it's just true. I mean, if you've already played what Georgia's played, do you need to play another SEC team in another non-home game to sort of prove your playoff status? You certainly shouldn't have to do that. So if there was ever a team that would be within its rights to say, we don't want to be in the SEC championship, we've already proven our playoff status, you would certainly think that Georgia is that team. But all of this just sort of gets kind of thrown together with what is a very messy situation right now where nobody seems to know what's what with kind of how this SEC championship is going to work, is going to hurt you, is going to help you. After all, for the loser of that game, even if they make the college football playoff, they have the potential of winning or having to play 17 games if they want to win a national championship. All of this is just a big old huge mess right now. And while Kirby Smart didn't want to talk yesterday about the race for the SEC championship, he was more than happy on Saturday night, starting with his interview on the field with the ABC television cameras, then after that with the post-game press conference, on his frustration right now that this committee just sort of makes it up as it goes along and doesn't seem to have any kind of well-defined criteria. And at least thus far, through 2 weeks' worth of these playoff rankings, Georgia right now not getting very much credit for the incredibly difficult schedule that it's played here thus far. I love the fact that even if Kirby didn't want to talk about the SEC championship yesterday, he at least wanted to get pretty heavy into what he thinks is a pretty murky picture involving the CFP committee overall. And with the rankings set to come out again here tonight, with Georgia expected to move up, probably worth revisiting Kirby's, I think, pretty pointed criticism of this committee going back to Saturday. Here he is from his post-game press conference.
Like I said after the game, I don't know what they're looking for. I really don't. I wish they could really define the criteria. I wish they could do the eyeball test where they come down here and look at the people we're playing against and look at them. And, you can't see that stuff on a TV. And so I don't know what they look for, but that's for somebody else to decide. I'm worried about our team.
So Kirby Smart, I think rightly so, saying what we've said on shows like this for such a long time, which is, man, this committee doesn't seem to know what they were looking for, doesn't seem to recognize it when they find it, and very little credit seems to be given for the fact that Georgia is playing week in, week out, the kind of schedule that an Indiana and a Penn State, even a Texas, teams like that have no relation to whatsoever. Other teams from, say, the Big 12 and that were ranked ahead of Georgia last week, and a little bit of frustration, a little bit of skepticism, on that kind of thing from Kirby Smart probably seems fair and probably seems well within his rights to do so. And he then followed that up, too, with this thought of, last week they're nitpicking you for how you played on offense, and they're doing all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the fact that you're going on the road continually in the SEC and being asked to sort of be essentially perfect against the schedule, the likes of which nobody else in America is coming close to playing right now. Once again, strong response from Kirby on that Saturday night.
I think they're going to always do that because that's what I say about the eyeball test. But they're not in that environment. They're not at Ole Miss in that environment playing against that defense, which is top 5 in the country with one of the best pass rushers in the country, and they're fired up. They got a 2-score lead, and they're coming every play. They don't know that. They don't understand that. So they'll probably look at this week and say, well, we just played against one of the best defenses in the country, and we went for 453 on them, and could have been more. So it's just the tale of each week. And we're trying to be the cumulative, whole, really good quality team and not be on this emotional roller coaster that's controlled by people in a room somewhere that may not understand football like we do as coaches. We as coaches look at people and say, what can we do better? How do we get better? I respect their decision. I respect their opinion. But, it's different in our league. So go Dogs.
Yeah, listen, let me kind of sum all this up this way. Even though the nature of this conversation is a little bit frustrating, I do kind of like the fact that we're having it. I really do. And I'll tell you, last year, if I'm just being completely honest, when Georgia barely lost Alabama in the SEC championship, I thought that Kirby Smart could have maybe argued for his team a little bit more forcefully than he did. I thought that Georgia justifiably should have been in last year's playoff. And I thought that Kirby Smart could have made a stronger case for his team. I don't know if Smart had it would have worked. It probably would not have. This committee was pretty intent last year to kind of create those regional Southeast, Southwest, Pacific Northwest, Midwest. They were pretty content to kind of do what they did a year ago, and they did it. But I think that Smart could have argued on behalf of his team a little bit more forcefully than he did. I think on Saturday night we saw Smart be willing to join the fight and say, this committee, what are they even talking about? What are they even looking for? Don't they recognize what we're being asked to do? And don't they recognize how much more superior the SEC is? Even the Big Ten, who everybody seems to be in love with these days. These Big Ten teams aren't doing on a week-in, week-out basis what we are currently doing. And Kirby Smart joined the fight on that this weekend. I was really happy to see that. And as this discussion continues about, who ought to be getting what and what the 12-team playoff field should look like, the role the SEC championship should play in all of this should be a part of that conversation too. And frankly, what Lane Kiffin was willing to say, what Kirby Smart didn't want to discuss, but maybe privately thinking, this maybe should be said out loud more frequently here too. If the goal is to make the playoff and beat up on some of these non-SEC teams, then having to play one more time against other SEC competition in a tough game that sort of only stands to hurt you, maybe that's not a good thing right now. And listen, I hate that because I love the SEC championship, but I probably love advancing in the playoff even more here right now. And avoiding the SEC championship, if we're all being honest, that may be the best way to make sure the playoffs work out the way you want them to. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. We're just really happy that you're a part of our program, and so thankful that our friends at ServPro make it possible there, too. Committee tonight on TV will try to clean up the mess of these college football playoff rankings. Will they succeed? We assume they probably won't because we don't trust them. But we do trust our friends at ServPro, because if you've got your own mess to clean up, the restoration specialists of ServPro, of course, they're going to come to your rescue. Fire breaks out, you have like a grease fire or something like that. It does huge damage to your home. Or maybe it's a rental property for you. How about a roof issue with your warehouse or something like that? Water gets in. You know how much damage that can do. You give water enough time, it'll make the Grand Canyon. Imagine what it can do in your property. Once again, a huge mess that has to be cleaned up. Well, the restoration specialists of ServPro, in situations like that, want to come to your rescue, want to put it all back together like it never even happened. That's what they're all about. Each franchise independently owned and operated. That means when you do business with ServPro, you're doing business with a company that's got just as much of an investment and a satisfactory outcome for you as you do for yourself, because that's what their livelihood depends on. So all the more reason you don't find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that today. And glad to have ServPro bringing DawgNation Daily to us here today. Okay, we're so busy today. It's Jake Fromm here coming up. There is also a lot of potential for upsets in the final 2 weeks of the SEC here, and it can get really interesting. We'll cover some of that, some recruiting talk here, there, too. Also, it's Connor Riley in a couple of minutes, too. Connor on some of the topics we were just discussing. Rankings coming out tonight, the role the SEC championship plays in all of this. We will do that. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. And typically on Doghouse, I try to hit one topic. I'm going to try to see if I can get two here really quick for a moment, because Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the first one here because we talked a good bit about this yesterday. But there was all this debate after Saturday's game about some of the officiating things and, Tennessee being penalized for the slow substitution, the, basically 12 men on the field penalty. We thought that Josh Heupel kind of whined about that a little bit after the game. And I thought that Smart yesterday, it's always interesting when Smart's willing to go into detail. Sometimes, and yesterday I thought he was in a pretty ornery mood. At least it seemed to be in the press conference. But sometimes he is willing to give you pretty good detail on something, a little bit more descriptive. And yesterday, Smart kind of went into a little bit more of a detailed description about one of the more talked about moments from Saturday's game. The fact that Tennessee seemed to be slow walking that substitution, gamesmanship, officials correctly did not let them get away with it. And yesterday in his sort of weekly press conference, Kirby was kind of good enough to sort of share his perspective, not just on the Georgia-Tennessee game, but the role that kind of thing plays in football overall. This is interesting from Kirby. Just for fun, I want to let you hear this.
I mean, the coaches know how it's supposed to work, or at least they're supposed to know how it works. I mean, in terms of what you're given, and the issue is every conference officiates it differently. I've watched teams really late at night, so you can imagine where they're playing, what part of the country they're in, where that's completely accepted in terms of take as long as you want. They don't actually let you do that in our league, and that's really to benefit the teams that play with pace. Because if they allow you to sub and take all the time you want, then you really slow teams down. And, there's not a game that I played in that they don't come over there and tell you either got to speed your guys up or we're going to set it on the ready for play, and we're going to wind the clock, because people have made it where if an offense makes a mistake and subs late, they're going to make them burn a timeout. Everybody tries to do it. We even try to do it. But you can't do it at the expense of there's 24 seconds, there's 23 seconds on the clock, and we're going to go sub a guy and take 20 seconds up, because that isn't what it takes. A lot of people say, well, they say you have to sub in 3 seconds. No, you have to start the substitution process in 3 seconds. That's how long you have to start the process. But it doesn't say once you start the process, you can go at a snail's pace off. They give you a reasonable amount of time, and they give you an opportunity to snap the ball. So that's the rule. And if somebody subs with 10 seconds left on the shot clock, they're probably going to get a delay of game if somebody tries to sub on defense. But if they do it with 20, there's reasonable time to sub.
So I don't have some major hot take. We talked about this a decent amount yesterday. I play that clip. I just think it's sort of good football talk from Kirby. That's pretty interesting. And, I do think there's a game within the game, and the pace and substitution stuff is a huge part of that. Offenses want to go fast, keep the same personnel in so you can't sub. It's one of the reasons why tight ends sometimes are so valuable, because they can kind of play a multitude of functions for you. You're not having to run guys in and out, which keeps you moving, keeps the defense from being able to get, gassed players off the field. But when you do have your chance to sub, some teams do want to kind of go slow to make that play clock wind down and just, kind of break up your rhythm. And I kind of don't fault Heupel on Saturday for trying to get the best of Georgia from a gamesmanship standpoint. As Kirby said, Georgia's going to have its own version of that kind of thing too. But when you do try to get away with something that's sort of outside the boundaries of the rules, I also don't fault the officials for calling you on it. And, it was sharp by Kirby to kind of get the review to show that the player really was slow getting off the field. I thought to me, this is just the chess match that goes on in football. And in a big SEC game between two really talented teams, and I do think Tennessee's a good team, in a big SEC game like this, any little edge matters. Heupel's trying to get it. Kirby's trying to, basically checkmate that. And on this particular case, Kirby's the one that wins today. So I think that's pretty sharp stuff. Now, there's also this, perhaps some good news for Georgia on the injury front. Yesterday when Smart spoke to reporters, first question out of the box is, for a guy that we saw leave the game with injury on Saturday, the very important Dillon Bell. We talk about multitude of roles, a versatile player. Obviously, Bell is that for Georgia, but he left Saturday's game with what was feared to be an ankle injury. Smart asked right away, hey, tell me about Dillon Bell's status as you move forward. This is what Kirby said about that.
No update on Dillon, really. I just ran into him a few minutes ago. He got an ankle sprain. Not going to require, is stable, not going to require any kind of surgery or anything. So hopeful to get him back, and same with Trevor.
And the Trevor there's Trevor Etienne, who I guess was reported on TV had fractured ribs. But on the Dillon Bell part of this for a moment, what Matt Zenitz, who's a pretty plugged-in guy who works for CBS Sports, writes is that there was a positive update on the injury to Dillon Bell. The injury is believed to be minor, and it seems it's even a possibility that he could be back for next week's game against Georgia Tech. That's reported there by CBS Sports, 24/7 Sports, Matt Zenitz, who gets a lot of injury news and things like that. So he's reporting that maybe Bell could be back, and the sort of fears of like a high ankle sprain, which would obviously be pretty detrimental at this late point in the season. Apparently that's not the case for Dillon Bell, at least according to the reporting there from Matt Zenitz. And Smart's comment sort of echoes that, mostly positive, certainly not super fearful in the overall tone there. So Georgia fans trying to grasp any good injury news right now, maybe the Dillon Bell stuff is an example of that. And that's Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily. I'm going to get Connor Riley on some of this here coming up in a moment. Let me also give a quick shout out to our friends at Discover Dunwoody before we get there, because obviously Georgia got a chance to play a lot of big games coming up in the city of Atlanta, and so many of you want to be a part of all of those. Well, guess what? As we kind of move into the month of December and maybe into January, with all this great stuff going on, the best place to maybe get a great hotel stay and enjoy some awesome shopping experiences, some wonderful restaurants, things like that, with our friends at Discover Dunwoody. You've got more than 2,100 hotel rooms right here in the Dunwoody area. That's 9 different hotels. That means you get a chance to have great savings. It's also conveniently located in kind of a safe, family-friendly environment nestled between 2 MARTA stations. That's a really good thing. Plus, while you're kind of enjoying your stay, there's a couple of hundred restaurants for you to enjoy. There's all kinds of shopping experiences. The Dunwoody area is kind of where we've called our DawgNation World Headquarters Studios. We've called it home here for a long time. And I'm telling you right now, if you're coming in for the possibility of a game for Georgia at Mercedes-Benz Stadium over the course of the next few weeks, whether it be SEC Championship or College Football Playoff, National Championship, whatever, Dunwoody, Georgia, this area here between a couple of great MARTA stations, great place to do all of that. So please find out more online, discoverdunwoody.com. That is discoverdunwoody.com. Now, we've got a lot to discover with Connor Riley here right now. Injury situation, SEC Championship controversy, college football playoff rankings, all of that. Let's cover that and more with Connor right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Serpro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let us say hello to Connor Riley, of course, always doing a great job here covering the situation in Athens for these dogs, and joining us here today on DawgNation Daily. Connor and I also on video tonight talking about the college football playoff top 25 when it comes out. But Connor, let me begin with injuries here. You got Matt Zenitz reporting that not a high ankle sprain from Dillon Bell. I'll take that as good news. You got obviously the lingering rib issue for Trevor Etienne, and whether you call it a fracture or not, I'm not even quite so sure that matters. If your ribs are hurt, you're not going to be able to play much football in that situation. Ernest Green, the issue that seemed like it kept him out of Saturday's game. What do you kind of make about Georgia on the injury front here, with perhaps a chance to get healthy against UMass? But I'm presuming maybe unlike some Tech games of the past, sort of an all-hands-on-deck situation for that Tech game, because obviously the playoff implications that Georgia could have on Black Friday night.
Yeah, so think back to a year ago in that game against Georgia Tech. Granted, it was, I think, closer than some people anticipated, but I don't think the final score maybe totally indicates how close that game was. But Georgia held Ladd McConkey out of that game. They held Brock Bowers out of that game. They held Tate Ratledge out of that game. They were not playing with their full deck intentionally. And they knew they had the SEC championship in the following week, and so they were trying to preserve for that. I think Dillon Bell is the most interesting case to watch here because, based on the Matt Zenitz reports, it sounds like he might be able to go and play against Georgia Tech potentially should that ankle heal up. And if they elect to play him in that Friday night game against Georgia Tech, I think it speaks volumes to, one, just about how much Georgia needs Dillon Bell at this point in the season, given the injury situation and the number of available bodies at wide receiver and at running back. But two, just what it says about that Georgia Tech game. I don't think we're going to see Trevor Etienne for the rest of the regular season. I think the hope is that you can maybe get him back for a college football playoff game. Ernest Green, we're going to see. I thought Monroe Freeling did some nice things at left tackle yesterday, or on Saturday rather. And I think there's something to be said about the continuity of just playing the same 5 guys throughout a game. I know that is something that Kirby Smart has gone against in recent years, but I think conventional wisdom has told us before that sticking with 5 on the offensive line is usually what works out. So with Dillon Bell in that Georgia Tech game, it's going to be interesting because Georgia's not going to know if they're in the SEC championship game or not when that game is played, and they could still find themselves in Atlanta, or they could find themselves having that week off. So I think what Georgia does over these next 2 weeks, specifically with a guy like Dillon Bell or a guy like Branson Robinson, it speaks a lot about how Georgia views that Georgia Tech game.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up on this, and it involves Ernest Green, who did not play on Saturday because of, I guess, the lingering. Is it it's shoulder for Green, right? Shoulder injury. So you talk to people, around all this. It seems like he's pretty hurt. Like he was pretty hurt for a while. And I think a lot of people, if I had to assume, are making a judgment on Green as a player right now on the basis of a guy who was trying to go out there when maybe he shouldn't have been. Maybe he was too hurt to play because, if you don't have the strength that comes from that arm of being able to obviously keep one of these edge rushers off a quarterback, I can only imagine how difficult it is to play in that situation. Is there a chance that if he can get healthy, that maybe Green comes back and gives a higher level of performance than maybe some fans are expecting right now? Because it seems like if he is as hurt as it has been described to me that he might be, that perhaps he has been somewhat unfairly maligned after a couple of what appear to be rough weeks.
Yeah, and I'll point this about Ernest as well. If you're not taking snaps in practice and your arm is hurt, and specifically it's his left arm, and if you're the left tackle, that's your outside arm. That's usually pretty important when it comes to trying to keep speed rushers off of the quarterback there. I think that you're not necessarily in the best shape because you're not practicing all the time. You're trying to mitigate against the arm injury you have. That's why I think some people have made the comment that he looks a little bit heavier and is playing a little bit bigger than perhaps he should be at that left tackle position. I'm curious, BA, when you say come back and play, do you mean and play at a high level rather? Do you think that is this season, or do you think that is more going forward into the 2025 season there? Because I sort of tend to believe that this is the latter. I think he can help Georgia still over the course of this season, especially if things don't go the right way with Monroe Freeling at left tackle there. But I think that this sort of seems like an injury that's going to need to be cleaned up and fully healed come the offseason. So, look, it's a credit to Ernest that he's out there trying to play to get it out. But I think that Monroe Freeling right now is probably Georgia's best option at left tackle, and that's why he played every snap in that must-win game against Tennessee on Saturday.
Okay, something to monitor going forward for sure. We started the show today by talking about the SEC championship a little bit and what seems like an obvious truth that not everyone wants to say out loud, which is if you feel like you're already in the playoff, you really don't want any part of the SEC championship. And, Connor, the SEC championship game is my single favorite sporting event. It has been for essentially since the event came into being, and certainly since it's been in Atlanta. I love it, even when Georgia's not playing in the game. I've always just loved this game. I just don't quite know what role it plays in the current world we're living in. Is there any argument in favor of the SEC championship, giving all the potential downsides for a team, especially Georgia, that thinks it's done enough to be in the college football playoff if it's 10-2?
For Georgia, no, I don't think so. If they win over Georgia Tech and they're 10-2 going into that game, I think that's your resume, and you're very comfortable with that. Like, sure, you'd love to maybe get a bye, but I don't think that there's a path to Georgia playing in that game and getting a home playoff game there. Because if they win the game, they're obviously going on to the quarterfinals anyway and playing in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. That is guaranteed if Georgia were to win the SEC championship game. And if you lose, I'm not going to give this committee the benefit of the doubt that they're going to keep Georgia where they are in the event that they're playing in the SEC championship game. They're probably going to get dropped down and, theoretically, maybe even out of the college football playoff altogether. And I do think that there are some teams out there that have a reason to worry. I think Texas is potentially one of them. Now, again, they'll have to beat Texas A&M to get into the SEC championship game. So that does give them a theoretical quality win there. But I think that's one to monitor. The doomsday scenario in my mind when it comes to the SEC championship game is what happens if Alabama gets there and they play Texas and they lose to Texas. And you have a scenario where you have a 3-loss Alabama team and say a 2-loss Tennessee team. That right now probably seems like it's the outside looking in terms of that fourth team to get into the college football playoff. Tennessee beat Alabama head-to-head. And how do you judge that extra data point that Alabama was forced to play in? I don't know how the committee is going to answer that. And I don't know how the committee is going to answer most things. And I think that's the terrifying proposition that a lot of these teams face. I do find it interesting, however, that Lane Kiffin is the one sort of banging the drum in this matter. BA, I've done the math, and if my math is correct, and I tend to believe it is, do you know what % chance Ole Miss has of playing in the SEC championship game?
I'm guessing it's pretty small.
0.0. So it's easy for Lane to make these points, but I think at the same point in time, it is a fair one, especially in this new age. And look, I know this game brings in a lot of money to both the teams that play in it and obviously the city of Atlanta as well. But I think Greg Sankey, and this should scare a lot of people, is going to have to look at a lot of creative solutions to figure out what to do with this type of game, because I think more often than not, there are just going to be negative downsides specifically for the losing team, more so than the upside of winning this game.
And listen, I think there are a lot of things that are true that you don't realize they're true until you kind of experience them. This year is a very different world for college football, and with the college football playoff being the way it is, I think I probably said during the offseason, there's no way you can punish the loser of the SEC championship and keep them out of the college football playoff. But Connor, I'm here to tell you that if Texas were to go to the SEC championship and lose, I'd have no problem with them being kept out of the playoff. They just simply haven't done enough to be, I would say, assured of being deserving of being in the college football playoff. And they would whine until kingdom come if that happened to them because it's the first year in the SEC and how could this league treat us this way and, monocle drop into the soup and everything else. But when you haven't done anything to prove your playoff status, if you lose the game that would be a validating point, a big neutral site win, if you lose the game that would give you a chance to kind of validate yourself, honestly, you're not going to see any tears shed for me if Texas were to lose the SEC championship, if it plays in it, and then be excluded from the college football playoff.
And I think you could include Texas A&M in that boat as well, because yes, while they would have the win over Texas, their resume, at least in my opinion, is lacking in that regard there. So I do think that as we are seeing this unfold, like the Big Ten is going to work itself out because they've managed to do something the SEC could not and figure out a way to set up their top teams for success. Whereas, look, the SEC, it's probably going to get 4 teams in, but, unless Indiana just gets its doors blown off by Ohio State this weekend, it's going to be hard to get, say, a 5th potential SEC team into the college football playoff. And the loser of that SEC championship game, there's going to be a lot of sweating in the, I guess, 20 hours after that game ends, 16 hours after that game ends, waiting to see, hey, did we actually get in, and did this extra data point that we had to play in end up hurting us? And if that's the case, and it is a big fan base like a Texas, like an Alabama, a Georgia even, and they end up getting left out of the college football playoff in a 12-team format because they had to play in this SEC championship game, I do wonder how much longer the SEC championship game will be something, at least in its current format, that is something that exists. Maybe the SEC gets creative and they go, hey, we're going to play multiple teams in that final weekend window, but it's going to be really interesting to see what the SEC championship game ultimately does, because I'll tell you this, it is absolutely going to have an impact on who wins the SEC championship, because I think the team that loses these games may not be playing in it.
So let's talk about the playoff rankings. We'll obviously be live tonight, react to them when they come out. What are you looking to see tonight? Obviously, we expect Georgia to move up, but beyond that, what is interesting to you about these rankings that are about to come out tonight?
Yeah, the homer in me, or at least the Georgia partisan in me, wants to see how high Georgia gets based on this win and the bounce-back performance that they had. I think the other thing that is at least a little interesting to me is what happens with the Big 12 champion and where do they end up falling in line? Because BYU lost this past weekend to Kansas, and they're understandably going to drop in the rankings. But Boise State keeps winning, and they not only won last week, they found a way to cover because that's what great teams do. And there's now starting to be a little bit of a scenario where I think Boise State could end up getting that number 4 team and securing a bye, because their only loss right now is to Oregon. It was 3 points in Autzen. And if they win out and they win the Mountain West, I think a quality league, they're going to have an argument over a Big 12 that has somewhat cannibalized itself. I know there's a conspiracy out there that Colorado, because of the name and the brand and Dion and Travis Hunter, I think if they win out and they win the Big 12 title game, that they are going to leapfrog Boise State. I would agree with that in theory, but I'm not rubber stamping Colorado to win a Pac or a Big 12 championship game just yet. So if it's, say a 2-loss BYU, an Arizona State, an Iowa State that can still win that conference there, is this college football playoff committee really going to put a G5 team, Boise State, into a bye spot in the college football playoff? Because I think they should, in the event that there is, other than, say, Colorado, a team that comes out of the Big 12, unless BYU finishes with just one conference loss. And I know that is going to upset a great number of people, but I think that is a story that we will need to watch moving forward closely.
And you also mentioned this, and I talked to Paul Feinbaum about this last week. To me, one of the hottest topics that no one's really addressing yet is, the committee through 2 weeks has sort of seemed like it's predestined that the Big Ten will get its 4 slots and the SEC will get its 4 slots. But what if Indiana, who's going to be highly ranked again tonight, what if they just get the doors blown off them by Ohio State on Saturday? Is that a playoff team? And, is there some door open tonight for the fact that the SEC, which has so many more playoff contenders than the Big Ten does, that maybe they just get the extra spot because right now it just is a deeper league? I'm a little bit frustrated right now that that's not a part of the conversation. And to me, that probably matters more than anything else, including some of the things that people are talking about too much. I think we need to be talking about how many total spots the SEC deserves in comparison to a Big Ten that just doesn't have nearly as many playoff contenders.
Yeah, I think if you're, and I'm not an SEC partisan, I'm not someone standing up for the grade of the conference or things like that, but for the Big Ten right now to have, 4 of the top 5 ranked teams, and Indiana hasn't played anybody. Penn State lost the only team that they played against in Ohio State, and that game was at home. I just have a lot of questions as to why this college football playoff committee values the Big Ten so much more than the SEC at this point in time. There are reasons for that. I'm interested in seeing what they are, but this college football playoff committee has time and time again shown us that it doesn't care about wins. It cares far more about losses and the manner in which you lose and how few you have. And I just think that that's a frustrating way to look at this, because if we're trying to determine the best team, which this college football playoff committee is allegedly trying to do, my definition of best is who brings the best A game. And Indiana, to their credit, they, except for the Michigan game, won every game that they've played by double digits. And I do give them credit there. But we're going to learn a lot about Indiana this weekend. And I believe Ryan Russillo had this stat, Big Ten conference slate. In an 18-team league, Indiana will have played 7 of the bottom 8 teams in the Big Ten in terms of conference ranking. That is just something that, again, you can have your biases. I think you can acknowledge your biases. How do you judge that team in comparison to a Georgia who will have potentially played all but one of the 2-loss SEC teams that are competing for a college football playoff spot? It's not something that's going to be fun to figure out. There are going to be people upset. But hey, that's why these guys are in 5-star hotels eating caviar and watching football on Saturdays.
Connor, great stuff. Can't wait to be on video with you tonight. We'll react to all of this when it happens. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro today.
Yep, as always, was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC.
All right, I'm going to move quickly through, cruise around the SEC with Royal Caribbean, because I do want to get to Jake Fromm here. We'll talk to Jake about a lot of these same topics, too, including also the fact that Georgia now gets to move up because of how it played against Tennessee on Saturday. So let's remind you that obviously Royal Caribbean's got so many great things going on right now as we roll towards 2025, and a great chance for you to take advantage of all that. In fact, if you talk to Jessica Slater right now, there's a wonderful Black Friday sale going on. Things that sort of make a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even more fun, the shore excursions and the drink packages and the dining packages and all that kind of stuff. There's great savings on that right now for the Royal Caribbean cruise vacation you perhaps have planned for the late year holiday time or early 2025. And Jessica can help get you even more of those great add-ons to make this a cruise experience unlike any you've ever had before. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslaterdreamvacations.com. She can tell you about everything that Royal Caribbean's got going on in 2025, whether it be Utopia of the Seas, sailing out of Port Canaveral, Icon of the Seas, sailing out of Miami, or whatever your option you're considering. A lot of really fun stuff going on with Royal Caribbean here this year, this upcoming year. So a couple of things here real quick just for a moment. Thing number one is this. I think it's about to get really interesting in these final couple of weeks of SEC play, where we're talking about what happens if all these teams are at 6-2, and how do you break these ties, and who gets in the playoff and who doesn't. And all of that is, obviously, very legit in the way of questioning. But we've also got, and I've been saying this now for a while, we've also got the potential for some pretty wild upsets the rest of the way here, too. And we saw one of those last week with, Florida beating LSU. That's sort of a minor occurrence in comparison to what might happen. What if Florida, with DJ Lagway, who's playing pretty well right now, especially now that he's healthy, what if they beat Ole Miss on Saturday? What happens then? Could that happen? We would say that there's a chance it does. Oklahoma beating Alabama, maybe a little less likely. But what about Auburn, though? Texas A&M is looking ahead to the biggest game. This is one of the biggest regular season games I've seen when Texas A&M hosts Texas the final week of the regular season. And all they got to do prior to that is to go into Jordan-Hare Stadium and knock off little old Auburn, who hadn't played very well against anybody here this year. Have y'all seen the point spread in this game? It is a tiny little spread. It is a tiny little spread. For a team in Texas A&M that's been pretty good this year, for Auburn it's been pretty terrible. It certainly seems like somebody somewhere at least sees the possibility of upset. And then Auburn against Alabama to finish the season. Tennessee trying to make a case for its playoff status. They got to play Vanderbilt at the end of the season. We have a chance for some pretty fun upsets here over the course of the last couple of weeks, or have some fun watching some of these SEC teams try to avoid that. And to be honest with you, it's not an SEC game, but Georgia's game against Georgia Tech is a little bit of an example of that too, where Tech would love nothing more than the potential of spoiling Georgia's spot in the college football playoff. A lot of these SEC teams right now may be having to avoid someone trying to play spoiler against them. Final couple of weeks of the regular season, I think, could be pretty good. I was going to do a thing on Julian Lewis. He decommits from USC. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. After having visited Georgia, certainly seems like right now Georgia not expect to be the beneficiary of that decommitment. The truth is USC's already added another quarterback. It seems like they knew Juju was not coming there. It really sort of feels like Colorado is the landing spot for Lewis right now. We've got Lewis on TV Friday night. I'm looking forward to that. But the interesting thing here is I would say the future of Deion Sanders is still pretty uncertain there in Boulder. He even joked about NFL overtures yesterday. But Lewis decommits from USC fresh off a Georgia visit. But it doesn't seem like this decommitment has very much to do with Georgia, if I were to guess. So with that, we can kind of bring the music down. We'll call that our cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously, want to get to our next guest here, who's always so much fun to talk about, especially when there's so much going on in college football right now. It's Jake Fromm here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And, of course, with Jake, we'll once again say congratulations. Jake, you don't want to say this, but I'll say it. There's a chance the Detroit Lions are the best team in the NFL.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me on. We got some good things rolling right now. Still have a long way to go left in the regular season. I think we have 7 games left. So, we're just trying to build, get better, and just finish out strong and try to do everything we can to get that 1 seed.
So I want to talk to you about how Georgia played on Saturday here in a moment, but let's talk about a couple of the sort of hot topics of the day here for a moment. Lane Kiffin says it. We assume that Kirby Smart might be thinking it. There's this thought out there that, gosh, maybe you don't want to go to the SEC championship, either because a loss could potentially knock you out of the playoff, or maybe it kind of knocks you from hosting a playoff game to now you have to go on the road to somebody, or at the very least, if you lose the game, maybe it's like 17 total games have to play if you want to win a national championship. Jake, one of my happiest moments of your career was your SEC championship win in 2017. Hard to imagine from then until now we're having this conversation, but I don't see the argument in favor of playing in the SEC championship when the potential of avoiding it seems to have so many possible benefits.
Look, I agree with you, but I absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
When I was playing in 2017, 18, and 19, the SEC championship, was borderline like the Super Bowl. Winning an SEC championship was, one of the biggest things you could do in your season. It meant so much to everybody, all the players and the coaches, the fan base as well. To be able to accomplish that was such a big deal. And the way the playoff is kind of orchestrated now, the SEC championship, it seems as if it's losing its luster just a little bit. The ultimate doomsday scenario for the committee would be, for all the favorites to win out, and then it's a Texas-Bama SEC championship game, and then Bama loses, and now we're talking a 3-loss Bama team not being in the college football playoff. So, I definitely see the advantage of not playing in this game, getting a week off to rest. That's a lot of games to play to win an SEC championship and then turn around and have to play in that first round. So, I completely agree with you, and I hate it, but it just looks like that's just the way college football is going.
You've been busy with your own football career, so I don't know how much of this you even really know, but on Saturday night, Kirby sort of I'll say kind of fired back at the committee. That's probably overstating things a bit, but I have a tendency to be hyperbolic. He sort of fired back at the committee over not really being sure what they're looking for when it comes to ranking these teams in the college ball playoff top 25, because a lot of us would say, hey, Georgia's played a far more difficult schedule than other teams have earned more quality wins than almost any other team has, and yet the committee only seems halfway interested in that, mostly kind of reverting back to the old form of, well, if you've got 0 losses or 1 loss, we're just going to rank you high because that's what college football's tradition has sort of always been. I'll tell you, I love the fact that Kirby said what he said, and obviously this comes across as self-serving because I'm a pro-Georgia guy, and of course you are too. But the truth is, I just think it's good for college football overall. If you want better games, you have to reward the teams that win those games. So tonight we have another opportunity to see this top 25 come out, and ultimately these rankings don't mean very much, but I always say how the committee talks is a window into their thought process, and at a certain point, I think some of us would love to hear this committee give a little bit more respect and kind of draw a line of differentiation between those who are playing tough schedules and getting big wins and those who have pretty records because they're essentially playing no one. How much have you been paying attention to that right now?
Yeah, bingo, Brandon, you nailed it. Me and Drew talked about this a lot on our Punt and Pass podcast. I mean, just like, in the real world, in law, the court system, you have to be able to set precedent of what matters to the committee and to the rest of the country, right? Is it how good are your wins? How bad are your losses? Is it just your pretty record? To me, strength of schedule matters. I think the nature of your wins and who you're playing matters. And I think as the fans, that's what we want to see. We want to see athletic directors and head coaches push and go out of their way to schedule big-time out-of-conference matchups. I think that's better for everybody involved. That's better for the fan experience. That's better for these universities who are scheduling these games and getting bigger primetime games with TV, marketing, that whole nine. And we have to say that matters when you go out of your way to play bigger opponents out of conference, and winning those games matters a ton. Obviously, this is not just because we have a bias towards Georgia, but the strength of schedule matters, who we're playing out of conference, and in your conference, who you're beating matters. So I'm a big advocate for that, and I think let's open it up. Let's be transparent of what the committee wants, because I think everybody wants it. Fans want to know, coaches want to know, players want to know, hey, what matters in this deal? What are you looking at? Is it just a pretty record, or do our wins matter? Or, hey, how we lost and who we lost to matters? I think it's such a big deal that they need to fix in some way, shape, or form.
And here's why I think that Georgia has a right to talk this way in a way that maybe other programs kind of don't, is, Georgia lost at Ole Miss and Georgia lost at Alabama. But, Jake, look at what Georgia has done in its last however many years you want to go back. When it's faced a non-conference ranked opponent, these games all kind of taking place outside of Athens, it's 34-3 against Clemson. It's, if you want to count last year's Orange Bowl, 63-3, 65-7 against TCU. They beat Ohio State. They blew out Michigan in the Orange Bowl. They beat Oregon 49-3. Georgia's record against ranked non-conference opponents now, certainly in the last, 4 years, has been, stellar. And so when Georgia says, hey, nobody does the way we do, the record it's compiled against the teams from other leagues that are sort of theoretical playoff contenders, I think it validates whatever Georgia wants to say in that respect.
Yeah, I agree. And you can't also forget beating Ohio State with C.J. Stroud. Yeah. Who you're playing matters and who you're beating matters. And I think the committee is going to find themselves in a pickle when all this kind of plays out. Because you're going to have a 2-loss Tennessee team, a 2-loss Ole Miss, a 2-loss Georgia, a Bama team with possibly 3 losses, or they could have 2 losses in SEC championship, and a 2-loss Texas team. So, this is going to be absolutely crazy. I think you can make the argument for a lot of SEC teams to be in the tournament. I think it's very well deserving. Playing in the best conference in the country, playing against a lot of really good football teams and a lot of good opponents. I cannot wait to see how this thing shakes out. I just want good transparency of what the committee is judging all this based on.
I want to ask you about the game against Tennessee. Let me remind folks before we get there, it is a Kroger Fresh Take, though, with Jake Fromm here today. And, of course, next Thursday is Thanksgiving, one of my favorite days of the year. I enjoy being grateful, of course, but I also really like good food. And Kroger's got all you need for the best Thanksgiving you can have, the turkey, the sides, the stuff that makes it a special day. And honestly, coming together with family and friends and talking about all we have to be grateful for is a really important thing. It's a special day. We've all been blessed so much. So make the most out of your Thanksgiving by going to your local Kroger and getting stocked up on everything to make it an awesome day. In-store, online, Kroger.com. Become a Kroger Boost member. Get your chance to do that. Great savings on the best Thanksgiving spread you can put together. Your local Kroger's got you covered on all of that. So, Jake, one of the things we said going into last week was, hey, for Georgia fans who are frustrated and for Georgia fans who sort of think the whole thing's just sort of broken right now, give them a chance to come back home. Give them a chance to beat an opponent that they've played well against in the past. Give them a chance to sort of show you another data point here. And maybe some of your opinions might change once you see this home game, kind of playing out the way that it did. And obviously it was a much better day for Georgia. Better day for Carson Beck, better day for the offensive line, a day in which Georgia had long scoring drives. Defense kind of kept a Josh Heupel offense at bay, which is not always an easy thing to do, although sometimes Georgia makes it look easier than it perhaps is. How much did you appreciate the improved level of performance from Georgia? And I guess how much did it alter your overall opinion about what Georgia can be for the season?
Yeah, this game was awesome. Just being able to respond in the way they did. This game was about winning the line of scrimmage, winning the turnover battle, and having your quarterback play better than their quarterback. And they checked all those boxes. The line of scrimmage was huge. The offensive line met the challenge, man, and they did a phenomenal job of negating the rush, negating the run stopper defense that Tennessee has had. They have not allowed over 20 points in their last 10 games, the longest streak in FBS currently. And man, they met up to the challenge. Being able to go home was huge. Heard the atmosphere was absolutely electric. Got to give props and credit to Josh Brooks there.
Yes.
Man, it was fun. You could just feel it through the TV. And let's not forget, this game didn't start the way they wanted to. They were down 10-0. Carson didn't necessarily start off hot. I think it was like 5 of 12, 5 of 13 at one point. They had that first shot of the game to Arian Smith down the left side, a go ball. But they kept chopping. They kept doing the things that they do. They were able to run the ball effectively. And Carson did a great job of using his arm, using his legs, hitting the seam bender to Oscar Delp, for the first touchdown of the game. And then just kind of after that, man, things kept rolling. They dominated the second half, scoring 14 points, Tennessee's 0. It was fun to watch. This is back to on-brand Georgia football. And if they can play that way, they will win a national championship, man. They just have to be able to do it consistently.
I love that, Jake. And I don't want to keep you long, but I do want to ask you about this. We talked about it earlier. As a quarterback, the controversy was the 12-man penalty on Tennessee. How much of the game within the game is, offense trying to go with pace so the defense can't substitute? You're keeping your 11 on the field so they can't substitute. Defense, when they do substitute, they're trying to go as slow as they can to sort of chew up your play clock. It doesn't always show up on TV, but that little chess match between when you sub, when you don't, how slowly you try to sub without getting in trouble as a defense, how big of a part of the actual gameplay is that sometimes?
Look, it's a chess match. That's part of your job as a head coach to be able to use certain things of the rules to your advantage, against your opponent. Tennessee likes to go fast, and that's something that happens to them. But then, we turn around and use what they're good at against them. So, man, it's just part of this chess match of football. That's why I enjoy it so much, the scheme, and then you having to win your one-on-one matchup. So, man, this game was great. I thought Kirby and the staff coached their butts off. Coach Bobo had a great job, a scheme and their game plan, and then calling the game as well. Man, it was excellent. Man, just super happy for those guys, and can't wait to see them build and grow on this moving forward. Man, just playing at home, I think helped a ton. The atmosphere and just being so loud and hurting Tennessee operate on offense was such a huge factor in this game.
Hey, Jay, great stuff. Thanks for being here on a Kroger Fresh Take here today, and I just hope everything continues to go well for you. We love your insight on everything involving Georgia football, and we're certainly looking forward to getting our chance to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here. And by the way, as Jake was talking, did y'all see the video? You talk about great video. And if you're listening to podcast, I'm sorry. But, man, we just had the perfect video of that defensive line of Tennessee jogging off the field. Cash Jones points over there and says, this guy's not getting off the field. That was very good, very, very well done strong video to sort of back up what has been certainly a hot topic all week long. Let me tell you what else is going to be very, very strong as well, and that is a brand new pool from our friends at White's Pools. Obviously, it's time to start thinking about that kind of stuff. Remember, like the Christmas vacation movie? Maybe you use your Christmas bonus and you get yourself a brand new swimming pool. And it's time to do that. Our friends at White's Pools are going to do that for you because they did that for Coach Rick, and you better know that he's going to have the absolute best stuff when it comes to his own home, so you can get the same pool at your house that Coach Rick has at his with his family-owned business. In the fourth generation providing people great swimming pools, there's nothing that can sort of bring your family together more than an awesome swimming pool experience, and that's what White Pools wants to give you. Custom in-ground pools. They also offer the cleaning services, the water testing, and all the stuff to sort of help you service that pool after it's put together here. They've been internationally recognized as a premier builder. That means they're doing great stuff for you. 2 retail locations, Watkinsville, Loganville, and they'll also give you a free AquaRite salt system on any of their new construction products. So find them online. It's whitespools.com. It's just like the color. WHITES, whitespools.com for more on that today. All right, brief update here just for a moment. There is an update coming, I believe, in the days to come about Eddie and his status. A lot of folks have been asking about that. There's a hot topic as I was going around Athens on Saturday. People were like, what's going on with Eddie? When's he coming back? I do believe we're going to have an update on Eddie in the very near future, and I'm looking forward to hopefully giving you more information. For today, though, a couple of golden shoes. We'll start with this. Speaking of Eddie, first of all, one of the Florida accounts put out that the Marco Wilson curse is over, that Florida finally beat LSU for the first time since the Wilson shoe throw. But our buddy Doug Aldridge wrote into me to say, after review, though, the Golden Shoe Award will still go on. Indeed, it will. Yeah, there you go. The original Golden Shoe still well placed there. And even though Florida has finally beaten LSU, the Golden Shoe's not going anywhere anytime soon. Doug's absolutely right about that. That is very well done indeed. Also, another Golden Shoe. I'm not going to play this video for you because it's theirs to play. But Georgia football did a really funny thing yesterday with Brett Thorson after his tackle on the punt return, where Kirby kind of even got in on this too. It's kind of nice to see Georgia in what has been probably a little bit of a tense season, sort of relaxing and enjoying things here for a little bit. So they had a nice, funny video. So go find the Georgia official account. I'm sure there's all kinds of places you can see this. Instagram, X, everything else. Thorson comes up there, kind of, comes out like Stone Cold Steve Austin, and ends up, kind of doing a whole spiel about making that tackle, and everybody seemed to have a good time with that. Brett's a really funny guy. Kirby got involved with this too. So we'll give a golden shoe to Georgia football for a pretty funny video and invite you to go check that out on Georgia's platforms. Lousy stinking Gators, you can check this out too. It's been 1,473 days since they have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We love our Gator hater updater. We give it to you each and every day. One of these days, Eddie will be back, but until then, we say free Eddie. And we'll see all of you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can check them out today. Of course, Go With The Flow returns on Friday. We are looking forward to that. So let's dive in here and get some comments. We went crazy long yesterday. I can't do that today, y'all. I've got a few things I've got to do. But we will look forward to having some good stuff. Spencer Clark on the subject of UMass. It's interesting. They just fired their coach, Don Brown. You'll remember him as the former Michigan defensive coordinator. But UMass on Saturday almost beat Liberty. Liberty's a pretty good team. They were in the they were in the New Year's Six Bowl last year. So UMass, played decent schedule, almost beat Liberty on Saturday. I mean, you'd like to think it's not going to be a close game, but they certainly played better than an absolute total doormat would be expected to play this past weekend. Frank Patterson brings an interesting point. He says one possible way they could solve the problem with the SEC championship is to declare the playoff teams before the championship game. Maybe that's the case. Let me tell you what I'm sort of in favor of. And this wouldn't be perfect either. But the committee is so bad at its job. The committee is so, I've said this before. Give me 12 football fans picked at random from some message board somewhere. I'll take them as my committee over the actual committee any day of the week because I just don't think this committee watches football the way that most of us do. And, it's like So I'm a Georgia person. Let's say that I can't have an opinion about Georgia. My evaluation of teams like Bama and Ole Miss and Ohio State and these others, I'm just watching these games so much more closely than the average committee person is. And the same thing for the average Bama fan or Ohio State fan. Like, there are plenty of college football fans who are just way more qualified to really choose the true 12 best teams than the actual people who have that job. They just don't watch college football the way we do. They don't talk about college football the same way we do. It's just not the same thing. So the committee is so bad at its job. One of the reasons why I like the 12-team playoff is it at least theoretically reduced their power because now more teams made it. So there wasn't as much power about choosing between, like, say, the 4th and the 5th best team. Now you're choosing between, like, say, the 12th and 13th best team, at least theoretically. My point is maybe this sort of shows you that they're not good at picking 12 any better than they were at picking 4. So therefore, maybe we get to a point someday where, like, everything is you play your way in. And that doesn't counterbalance the fact that the SEC is just so much a better league than the others are when it comes to true championship contenders. But at least it takes the power away from the committee. In other words, let's say there was some way that you actually played your way in of the 4 best teams in the SEC made it and the 4 best teams in the Big Ten made it and however many from the other leagues made it. Maybe that was the case as a way of, at least taking the power away from the committee, because I just don't think this committee knows what it's doing. And that's true whether Georgia gets in or not. Let's see what else. Yeah, so Scott Pete points out something that has been talked about. He says the Dogs have more ranked wins than Oregon, Texas, Indiana, Penn State, and Miami combined, and the committee doesn't care. And look, here's what I'd say to that. At best, they don't care. At best, they don't care. At worst, that's a problem. Like, Georgia beating Clemson 34-3. I say this all the time. And this makes me sound like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but I'm 100% convinced this is true. Georgia beats Clemson 34-3. That ought to prove Georgia's worthiness as a playoff team, because Clemson in its own right is a playoff contender. But if anything, Georgia beating Clemson 34-3 is a problem for the committee, because the committee does not want a playoff game to be 34-3, because 34-3 means fewer people watching in the second half, although in the case of the Georgia-Clemson game, a lot of that scoring happened in the second half. But like, Georgia's habit of beating these non-conference teams so badly, which ought to be a point of inclusion for Georgia in the playoff, ends up being, if we have any justifiable reason to exclude them, that's what we need to do, because they don't want 65-7. They don't want 63-3. They don't want 49-3. And these scores that Georgia piles up against these non-conference teams, the committee does not want that. The committee does not want that. So if it has any reason to exclude Georgia, that's what it's going to do. And if later on, if it looks at its options and realizes, okay, well, we need Georgia in this playoff, then at that point in time, they will talk all about Georgia's strength of schedule. But they're not going to do that until they decide they need it. And at that point in time, they'll change their argument and they'll change their discussion and they'll start saying whatever. The powers that be in college athletics love to keep all of their options open, free to make any decision, even one that contradicts their previous decisions at any moment. That's what they like to do. All right, let's get a couple of Facebook comments, because I did not go to Facebook this morning. And we'll come back to the others here, too. And then after that, we're going to bounce out of here in a little bit. And so hope you'll see us tonight on video as we do react to this. Because the honest truth is, obviously, we're a pro-Georgia show making a pro-Georgia argument. But the truth is, I like the rankings. I like debating about all this. We may be having an issue on Facebook over here. Barry Watkins wants to see Georgia thump UMass and Tech. George Herndon, thanks for the kind words. Scotty G brings up an interesting point. He says, I think the SEC tournament would be more exciting than the actual playoffs. In a roundabout way, I sort of think that's true, where as opposed to trying to decide, well, how many SEC teams actually get, inclusion in the playoffs? Like, what if the SEC, with 16 total teams, what if it did like the thing that people talk about, like 4 quadrants or like 4, if you want to call them divisions. You won your division, then you advanced to play another SEC team in kind of a semifinal, and then the SEC championship was just the championship. Let me tell you something. I've seen Georgia win 2 national championships. If the SEC sort of took its ball and went home and sort of did its own thing, I mean, would we really be at a loss as a society if we didn't see Georgia beat BYU by 55 points? Like is any of our lives lesser if we don't see, Georgia beat Notre Dame by 31 points? I don't know how much more I need to see Georgia, beating up on these other teams. For now, that's my goal. My goal has always been, give me a chance to see Georgia playing against one of these other teams. That's always been my goal. But, ultimately, sort of an SEC-only playoff may be the best overall thing to do. G. Grace on the subject of Bama getting that home playoff game. So that's the next biggest thing. That's the next biggest thing. I've told you what my conspiracy is they're going to make Georgia go back to one of these places it's already been. That instead of getting it to go play, if Indiana makes like an Indiana or a Penn State or a Notre Dame, one of those teams that Georgia would literally beat by 4 touchdowns at least, even on the road. They're going to make Georgia go back to, Ole Miss, go back to Alabama, even go back to Texas. That's just going to make me so mad. That's going to make me so mad. Let's see. What else? Some of these comments I'm not going to read. Let's see what else. Jaywalk says the SEC should form, basically like its own schedule where you only play in the SEC. I mean, first of all, what if the 12-game schedule was nothing but SEC games, right? I mean, if you did that, you play a 12-game schedule with only having to miss what? You'd miss a handful of the teams, but yeah, I'd be okay with that. Garrison Tucker says we can get a DawgNation helmet going on my desk. So this was actually made for me. It's DawgNation on this side, DawgNation Daily on that side. This was actually made for me by a couple of the nice folks I live in Daytona Beach from our DawgNation cruise. And don't you love that? I mean, I just think that's Darren and Lisa, their names. Darren's the one that made it. But they gave it to me. I love that. Frank Patterson says that Optimus Prime is on track to win the Rookie of the Year. Yeah, I mean, Brock Bowers having an amazing year for the Raiders. They're terrible, but he's amazing. I mean, part of me would like to ask, and of course you see him, celebrating on Sunday. Maybe he's the happiest guy in the world. But I would like to ask, are you having fun? Like, you're playing this terrible team. You're having a great year. Is it really bad? I mean, I guess it probably is. I guess you have to go to the NFL, but you do kind of wonder, is it more fun being in the NFL for this terrible team when you're doing well, as opposed to being in Georgia and doing what you could be doing here? Armando Black says the Dogs will get a home game or will be matched up against Notre Dame. I mean, listen, I hope that's true, but think about this for a moment. I mean, does Georgia have any chance, barring losses from somebody, does Georgia have any chance of being seated ahead of Bama and Ole Miss, two teams with similar records that beat it head to head? I guess Georgia's best chance of hosting a playoff game, and I'm doing this off the top of my head. Maybe I'm not doing this correctly, but it seems like if Texas doesn't win the SEC, well, now Georgia would have the argument over Texas, and maybe that kind of moves them into that sort of top 8 category where they get a chance to host that playoff game. But I would have no sweat for Georgia going to Notre Dame. I mean, no sweat. First of all, can you imagine what the Notre Dame people would be trying to do to keep those Georgia fans out? Austin put the Georgia game the same week as the F1 race. You may have the Notre Dame people trying to call up and say, hey, can we get an F1 race in Chicago Speedway this weekend to sort of keep these Georgia people from getting here? Can you imagine what Notre Dame would do to keep Georgia fans out of that building if Notre Dame, first of all, Georgia would be, oh my gosh, that'd be wild. That'd be wild. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a little bit. Senior Dog on Kirby Smart's comment about Georgia not getting enough turnovers. Yeah, I mean, look, in two of Georgia's better games this season, the Tennessee game, the Texas game, Georgia's really gotten after the quarterback both times. And there's a certain randomness to the turnover game that's sort of hard to predict. But if somehow, and I know styles of play make this sometimes difficult, but usually when the games matter most, Georgia finds a way to get after the quarterback. If Georgia were to do that on a more consistent basis throughout the season, my guess is the turnover stuff would probably go up a little bit. But yeah, I don't know what you're saying. UGA Marine says after Indiana loses, Ohio State loses in the Big Ten championship game, we could easily see Penn State 5, Bama 6, Ole Miss 7, Georgia 8. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible that Georgia gets there. Let me say it this way. I guess I'm just sort of bracing for Georgia not hosting a playoff game. To me, am I wrong for saying this? And if I am, y'all tell me. That it's more likely than not that Georgia doesn't host a playoff game? Am I wrong for saying that? And I'm not saying they don't deserve to host. That's not the argument. I'm not saying they don't deserve to host one. But my instinct is it's more likely than not that Georgia doesn't host a playoff game. Am I wrong about that? If I am, please tell me. DT says his daughter and sister-in-law had to stay in Dallas for the Texas game. Prices were too high in Austin. Yeah, I mean, it was a very expensive trip. And one of these days, we got to talk about this a little bit, about just how expensive these games are and how sustainable that is in the long run. Tia Stovall says, I'd rather Georgia not play in the SEC championship game. It's not East versus West no more, so what's the point? Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a pretty prevailing thought here right now. James Crum says, if Texas loses to Kentucky, that's a bad loss. If they lose to Texas A&M, then Texas lost their only two ranked opponents. Texas cannot afford a loss in the SEC championship. Yeah, I mean, I like to think that Texas can handle Texas. That Texas can handle Kentucky. It seems like Mark Stoops is on his way out. Texas, surely to goodness, can take care of business against Kentucky. But I'm sort of like you. It's like, well, if you then lose to Texas A&M, who is going to, y'all, this is one of the biggest regular season games I can remember. A&M is going to be fired up beyond all the moon. Now, they've also laid a million eggs at home over the years. So maybe this is another example of that from them coming up. But, I mean, gosh, at a certain point, Texas just needs to beat someone. And if they were to lose to A&M, it's like, what are we doing here? And that's why I think I said this to y'all yesterday. Like, the one thing that I'd like to see tonight, putting aside my skepticism at the Big Ten, if you really did this right, you'd rank Georgia ahead of Texas. Wherever you put Georgia, you can put them 20th, you can put them 10th, you can put them 2nd. But wherever you put them, Texas should be ranked behind Georgia. Miriam Corbin says the ticket office sent out an email yesterday with the cost of the playoff games. I can only imagine how expensive that's going to be. Jeff Ryan says he thinks that I'm wrong. Georgia will have a home playoff game. And look, you may be right, and that's one reason I said that. Like I haven't crunched the numbers or anything like that. I guess I'm just sort of assuming, and some of my assumptions sort of on the basis of chalk prevailing. But admittedly, a lot of that's also kind of slotting Texas in as the SEC champ, which certainly cannot, as we just said, cannot be guaranteed. Alan Verbanchik said, did my dog eat Eddie? No, it did not. And I do believe we're going to have an update on Eddie coming up within the next couple of weeks, perhaps. We're going to get that in the next couple of weeks. All right, final thoughts, but we got to get ready to go. Jackson09 says, it's like everybody just pretends that Bama didn't lose to Vanderbilt, or they did, but we'll just pretend like we don't remember. Yeah, I get that. I think the Alabama resume is sort of an interesting one in the fact that, you don't love the loss to Vanderbilt, although Vanderbilt's played pretty well this year. I do think that Alabama's collection of wins is pretty impressive, margins of victory here against the likes of Missouri and LSU. Now, LSU losing to Florida takes some of the luster off that last one, but they beat South Carolina. South Carolina's a pretty good team right now. So, obviously the Bama loss to Vanderbilt hurts, their case. But their wins, including beating Georgia, pretty impressive. I have to admit that. So, I don't have a problem with Bama being in the playoff. I don't have a problem with that at all. And this is one of those weird deals where, so Tennessee beat Alabama. Tennessee has the same record as Alabama, but Tennessee is not making the playoff over Alabama. That's why I think that the SEC should just get more playoff bids, more than the Big Ten, because it's unfair that Tennessee be compared to an Alabama team that it beat or a Georgia team that beat it. Can we not compare Tennessee to Notre Dame? Can we compare Tennessee to Indiana? Can we compare Tennessee to Penn State? That's the comparison that we ought to be making, I think. Lou says that Bama might be the best team in the country right now. If you would give me a free ticket on any team to win the national championship, I said this the other day, Bama would be the team. If you just gave me a ticket, chance to win, win money if it cashes, Bama would be the ticket I'd probably want right now. I do, because I do put a lot on who they've beaten. In a world in which I believe everybody will eventually lose, because I don't believe that Oregon's going to win the national championship. Everybody will eventually lose. I start to look at, kind of who you've beaten and who Alabama's beaten and how it's beaten some of them. I have to admit, I'm pretty impressed with some of that right now. Frank Patterson asked about Bear returning to the team. I know he was in Athens on Saturday. I don't think that Bear's coming back. I will say this. When Bear first left, what I had heard is that while a lot of people thought that was addition by subtraction, the truth is there were people within that program that thought Bear was a pretty effective interior pass rusher and weren't quite so sure that not having him on the team was going to work out well. But honestly, commitment, work ethic, things like that have always, just being honest, been a little bit of an issue. So I don't believe that Georgia wants to go back down that path again. But Bear Alexander is certainly a very talented football player. And at one point, his talent probably gave him some leeway that maybe he didn't always earn. But now that he's gone, I think that Georgia's probably content to let him stay gone. But honestly, I don't wish anybody ill will necessarily. So maybe Bear can kind of find a football home here and kind of showcase his talents. But I do not believe that's going to be at Georgia. Spencer Clark says he'd go with Georgia to win it all. Well, I think the point we made the other day is that, because we were saying this back when Georgia hadn't beaten Tennessee yet, that what we said was, okay, well, if you're down on Georgia and you assume that Georgia can't win it, then who would you pick to win it? And is that a team that you don't think Georgia could be? And obviously Alabama's a team that, while Georgia didn't lose to them, I don't think you watched that game and said Georgia couldn't have won that game. They almost did. So, it's important to note that even before the Tennessee game, we were kind of making the case that Georgia's still more alive for the national championship than you realize. That's the reason we had the national championship trophy at the car dealership the other day at Beaver Toyota of Cumming with our friends at Dr. Pepper. All right. We're going to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. One of the things that RS Andrews, because the RS stands for rapid service, they are a tremendous resource for you in the event that you have a plumbing emergency. Something crazy happens, RS Andrews wants to go to work for you very quickly and get that job taken care of, get it all fixed up for you, in many cases the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com. And have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. Plenty more to talk about. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to speaking to you then.